When I think back to that day, it still feels like a cruel joke, as if the universe decided to flip my entire world upside down right when I was supposed to be standing on top of it. Walking into that room, hearing the loud burst of surprise from the mouths of my friends and family, I felt my heart swell with gratitude and joy. For a brief, beautiful moment, I was overwhelmed with love. Everyone I cared about had gathered just for me, to celebrate my birthday, to make me feel special. I remember scanning the room, seeing the smiling faces, the colorful decorations, the cake that bore my name in big looping letters. I thought it was going to be one of the happiest days of my life, but within minutes that joy would curdle into something dark and cold. It was so bizarre how quickly it all happened. I spotted my sister and my husband across the room, standing close, far too close for two people who were supposed to just be in-laws. At first, I didn't want to believe the worst. My brain scrambled for innocent explanations. Maybe they were whispering about my gift, or maybe planning the next surprise for me. But then my eyes adjusted to the way his hand rested on the small of her back, how she tilted her head up to him with a look I had once thought was reserved only for me. It was subtle, probably unnoticeable to anyone else in the room, but to me, it was as glaring as a spotlight. I tried to swallow the rising panic, telling myself I was imagining things. It was my party, after all. Surely I was just on edge, reading too much into a harmless interaction. But then, like life was determined to strip away every last bit of my denial, I watched them lean in, just a little too close. Their faces hovered together in a way that made my heart seize, and in that instant, something inside me broke. The shock of betrayal didn't come with fireworks. It was quiet, heavy, like a stone dropping into the pit of my stomach. I must have stood there frozen for a full minute, trying to process what I was seeing, hoping desperately that I was wrong. But when my sister finally noticed me watching, the way her face drained of color told me everything I needed to know. My husband turned, a nervous smile plastered on his face, and even that attempt at normalcy felt like a slap. I think I muttered something, I'm not even sure what, before I spun around and stumbled toward the bathroom. I locked the door behind me and just stood there, staring at myself in the mirror. My reflection looked so lost, so confused. I pressed my hands against the counter to steady myself, my legs threatening to give out. The irony was so vicious. This was supposed to be a surprise party for me, a moment of joy carefully orchestrated by the very two people who had been orchestrating my betrayal behind my back. I thought about how many times I had gushed to my sister about how lucky I was to have my husband, how I had bragged about their friendship, how I had ignored the faint, nagging warnings inside me. I thought about how many people in that very room probably had no idea what was unfolding right in front of them. When I finally emerged from that bathroom, everything looked different. The decorations felt garish, the laughter too sharp. I put on a brave face, somehow made it through the rest of the evening without collapsing, but inside everything was unraveling. The shock of that discovery, delivered at what was meant to be my happiest moment, cut deeper than anything I could have imagined. And it was only the beginning of the pain that would follow. It's strange how, once everything comes crashing down, your mind starts to replay old memories on an endless loop, but with a new, brutal clarity. After that day, I couldn't stop thinking about all the small, subtle signs that I had so carelessly brushed aside. They were like little pieces of a puzzle I had refused to put together, each one harmless enough on its own, but together painting a picture I hadn't wanted to see. I remembered how my sister used to tease me about my husband in ways that made me feel slightly uncomfortable. Little comments about how handsome he was, how lucky I was to have landed someone so charming, all said with a playful laugh. I would just smile and roll my eyes, telling myself that's just how sisters joke. It never occurred to me to question why those jokes always lingered a beat too long, why her eyes seemed to light up a little too brightly when he walked into the room. And then there were the times I'd come into a space and find them laughing together over something I wasn't in on. I'd chalk it up to their shared sense of humor, grateful that they got along so well. After all, wasn't it every woman's dream to have her sister and husband be close? I wore my naivety like a badge of honor, proud that my family was so intertwined. I never paused to consider the way they sometimes broke apart when I entered, how their voices would suddenly change, or how my sister's hand would discreetly slip away from his arm. I also started to replay all the excuses, countless excuses, that now rang so hollow. The times my husband said he was working late, only to come home with that distant look in his eyes. The moments my sister cancelled plans with me last, it because she claimed to be exhausted, only for me to later learn she'd been out anyway. I chalked it up to coincidence, to the stress of life, to anything except what it truly was. It's frightening how good we can be at lying to ourselves, how desperately we cling to the belief that the people we love would never betray us. There was even that one time, a memory that haunted me after everything was exposed, when I found a receipt for an expensive dinner tucked in the pocket of my husband's coat. The date was from an evening I was sure he had spent at work. When I'd casually asked him about it, he had smiled, kissed my forehead, and mumbled something about a client dinner. I believed him without question, feeling almost guilty for even asking. Meanwhile, my sister had texted me that same night, saying she was too tired to talk. Looking back, the two stories lined up in the most awful way. It's like my brain had stored all these little inconsistencies somewhere deep, unwilling to process them. I wanted so badly to protect the image I had of my perfect life, to believe that my sister and my husband loved me enough to never cross such a line. In many ways, I think I betrayed myself by not trusting my own instincts. My gut had whispered to me so many times, sending tiny warnings that something wasn't right, but I had silenced it every single time. I chose comfort over confrontation, ignorance over the painful truth. Now, standing in the wreckage of everything I thought I knew, I realized those whispers were my heart trying to save me. If only I had listened, because sometimes the signs are all there, bright as day, and we simply refuse to see them until it's far too late. When the time finally came to confront them, I wish I could say I did it with the kind of poise and sharp, cutting words you see in movies. The truth is, it was messy and raw, and I stumbled through it with my heart pounding so violently I could barely hear myself think. It all happened right there at the party, surrounded by people who moments before had been laughing, eating cake, clinking glasses to celebrate me. I don't think I consciously decided to do it in front of everyone. It just spilled out. My emotions were a live wire by then, sparking and desperate for release. I remember standing across the room, trying to keep myself composed while watching my sister and husband whisper to each other again, their bodies turned inward like they shared a private world I wasn't welcome in. I had spent weeks, no, years ignoring my instincts, but that night, something inside me refused to stay silent any longer. I walked right up to them. My legs felt like they were moving through wet cement, heavy with dread and anger. I didn't even know what I was going to say until the words tumbled out of my mouth. I think I asked them, half laughing in disbelief, if there was something they wanted to share with me, if all these little secret moments between them were as innocent as they'd always claimed. I could see the blood drain from my sister's face. My husband's eyes darted around, looking for an exit, maybe hoping this was some nightmare he could wake up from. The people nearest us began to quiet down, catching on that something wasn't right. Conversations fizzled, laughter died, and a thick, uncomfortable silence settled over that part of the room. It was like we were suddenly on a stage, every eye fixed on us, waiting to see what would unfold. When neither of them spoke, something inside me snapped. I raised my voice. I don't even know what words I used, probably something broken and jumbled, demanding honesty, demanding to know how long this had been going on. The betrayal felt so sharp it stole my breath, made my chest ache as if my ribs were being pried apart. Still, they stood there, guilty and silent, like children caught in the act. My sister's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. My husband reached for my hand, a pitiful, desperate gesture, and I recoiled like he'd tried to burn me. That small rejection seemed to confirm everything for the people around us, and I could hear gasps ripple through the crowd. A couple of my friends awkwardly stepped forward, as if to guide me away, but I shook them off. I didn't want comfort. I wanted answers. I don't know how long it lasted. Those few torturous minutes felt both eternal and over in a blink. Finally, I just stood there, tears clouding my vision, realizing that nothing they could say would undo what they'd done. That moment of public exposure was brutal, humiliating, and yet somehow necessary. It stripped away all their carefully built lies in front of everyone who mattered. There was no way to hide from it anymore. Eventually, I turned and walked out. I left my own party without saying goodbye, feeling hollowed out, like the best parts of me had been carved away. As the door closed behind me, I realized that this was going to be the start of something far more painful than I could have imagined, but also maybe the beginning of finally finding the truth I had been too afraid to face for far too long. What I never truly grasped until this all happened was just how far the ripples of betrayal can reach. I used to think that if someone cheated, it was mostly between the couple, that the pain and mess would stay contained in that small circle. But standing where I am now, I see how naive that was. The truth is, when trust is shattered like this, it doesn't just destroy the bond between two people. It fractures entire families, shakes friendships, and forces everyone in its orbit to question where they stand. After that night, the awkwardness among everyone who witnessed the confrontation was almost unbearable. Friends who had once felt like my second family started acting nervous around me, unsure of what to say, afraid of picking the wrong side. Some of them tried to tiptoe around the subject, inviting me out for coffee or dinners that turned into clumsy, half-hearted attempts to distract me from what had happened. Others simply disappeared. I'd get texts that said, "thinking of you," but they wouldn't actually reach out beyond that. It hurt to see who distanced themselves. It hurt more to realize that some people couldn't handle my pain because it made them uncomfortable. Then there was my family. My parents were devastated, of course, but it was more complicated than I ever imagined. My mother tried desperately to pull us back together, calling it a terrible mistake, as if it could be swept under the rug and life could carry on. My father, on the other hand, was furious, hardly speaking to my sister at all. Family gatherings turned into tense, silent affairs, if we even managed to gather at all. Holidays became battlegrounds of scheduling, with whispered questions about who would be invited and who would be left out. Suddenly, every plan had to be carefully orchestrated so we wouldn't have to be in the same room. And it wasn't only my immediate family that felt the strain. Cousins, aunts, uncles, people who had once looked up to our close-knit bond started treating us differently. I could see the pity in their eyes, the sideways glances that questioned what really went on behind closed doors. It was like my marriage collapse, and my sister's betrayal had branded us with a scarlet letter that the entire extended family couldn't stop staring at. What broke my heart the most was seeing how my parents aged almost overnight. Their joy dimmed, their laughter grew sparse. I could tell they felt like they had failed somehow, as parents, as the keepers of our family's unity. Meanwhile, my sister avoided me entirely, retreating into her own guilt or maybe her own justifications, I wouldn't know, because we hardly spoke after that. The bond we'd shared since childhood, the hundreds of inside jokes, the secrets whispered under blankets at night when we were little girls, all of it just gone. It also forced my friends into a cruel kind of loyalty test. Some rallied around me, unwavering, furious on my behalf. Others made excuses for staying neutral, saying things like, "It's not our place," or "We don't want to get involved." But by not taking a stand, they inadvertently did. I found out quickly who was truly there for me, and who was only there when things were easy and uncomplicated. Looking back, I realized the betrayal didn't just cost me my marriage. It stole my sense of family, strained old friendships, and reshaped every dynamic I thought was solid and safe. It forced everyone who loved us to pick sides or step carefully around the shards of what was once whole. In the end, the pain radiated far beyond just me, leaving a trail of fractured relationships that none of us could have imagined when this all began. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that pain has a strange way of forcing you to discover exactly who you are. In those first few months after everything came out, I was completely hollowed out. I could barely get out of bed most mornings. The world felt dim and gray, like someone had drained all the color from it. I replayed everything over and over, every laugh, every tender moment, every promise that turned out to be nothing more than fragile glass, shattering under the weight of the truth. At first, I tried to pretend I was okay. I went through the motions, kept up appearances for work, nodded and smiled when people told me how strong I was. But inside, I was raw and bleeding. I would come home, close the door, and just stand there in the quiet, listening to the echo of my own loneliness. The nights were the worst. That's when all the questions would crowd in, demanding answers I didn't have. How could they do this to me? What did I miss? Was there something wrong with me that made them seek comfort in each other? Therapy became my lifeline. I remember walking into my first session, hands trembling, barely able to look the therapist in the eye. I spilled everything out in one long, breathless confession, half afraid she would look at me the way so many others had, pitying or worse, judgmental. Instead, she listened, truly listened. Slowly, she helped me peel back the layers of grief and humiliation. She guided me to see that their betrayal was never a reflection of my worth. It was about their choices, their flaws, not my inadequacy. Around the same time, I leaned hard on the friends who stayed. They didn't always have the right words, but they showed up. They sat with me on my couch while I cried. They brought me takeout when I hadn't eaten all day. They reminded me to laugh, even if it was just at some silly video or memory. Piece by piece, they helped me stitch together a sense of normalcy. I also started doing things just for myself, for the first time in years. I signed up for a pottery class. I took long walks without needing to check in with anyone. I started reading again, losing myself in stories that weren't my own. Slowly, I could feel my heart start to mend, not because the pain vanished. It never truly does, but because I was learning how to live alongside it. One afternoon, months after everything had fallen apart, I caught my reflection in a shop window. I actually paused and took myself in. There I was, standing tall, alone but not lonely, with a quiet strength in my eyes that I didn't recognize. That was when it truly hit me. I had survived. The worst thing I could imagine had happened, and yet there I was, still breathing, still moving forward. Through all of this, I uncovered parts of myself I might never have found otherwise. I discovered I was far braver than I ever gave myself credit for. That I could face devastating loss and still keep my heart open to the good in the world. That I could be broken and still rebuild, maybe even into something stronger. The woman standing here today is not the same one who walked into that surprise party, blissfully unaware of the storm waiting to strike. She's wiser, more cautious with her trust, but also more deeply compassionate, especially for herself. And that, I think, is its own quiet kind of victory. So why am I even sharing all of this with you? Why drag these old wounds into the open? Lay bare the ugliest moments of my life for others to see. It's a question I've wrestled with more times than I can count. There were days I thought it would be easier to just bury it all, pretend it never happened, keep smiling so no one would suspect how deeply I'd been hurt. But somewhere along the way, I realized that silence only keeps you trapped, replaying the same heartbreak in your own head, isolated in your pain. I started talking because I wanted to reclaim my story. For so long, I let it define me in all the worst ways. I was the woman who got betrayed by her sister and husband, the one who wasn't enough, the one people whispered about at gatherings when they thought I couldn't hear. But I've come to see that telling my story myself takes that power back. It means the narrative isn't just about what they did to me, it's also about what I did after. How I found the courage to confront it, how I kept moving forward, how I'm still standing here today. I also share this because maybe, just maybe, someone out there needs to hear it. Maybe someone is ignoring their own intuition the way I once did, brushing aside those uneasy feelings that something isn't quite right. I wish I'd had someone back then telling me it was okay to trust my gut, that I wasn't paranoid or insecure, that love doesn't require you to silence your instincts. If even one person hearing this story feels less alone, or finds the strength to ask the hard questions in their own life, then it's worth every shaky word. And beyond that, I hope it serves as a reminder of what resilience really looks like. It's not glamorous. It doesn't come with triumphant music swelling in the background. Most days it's quiet, almost invisible, getting up when you'd rather stay under the covers, feeding yourself when you have no appetite, answering calls you'd rather let ring. It's choosing to believe that one day the pain will dull enough to let hope back in. I also want to be honest about the fact that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean you'll reach some perfect point where none of it matters anymore. There are still moments that catch me off guard, where an old memory flashes by and I feel that familiar ache. But the difference now is that it doesn't define me. It doesn't drown me. It's just a part of my story, not the whole of it. Over time, I've come to see this experience not only as a devastating betrayal, but also as a profound awakening. It forced me to rebuild my life on firmer ground, to strengthen the relationship I have with myself above all else. It taught me the painful but priceless lesson that my value isn't tied to anyone else's loyalty, that my worth is not something another person gets to diminish or validate. So if you find yourself standing where I once stood, in that awful gut-wrenching place of heartbreak and confusion, I want you to know it's not the end. You are still whole, even when someone else treats you like you're not. You are still deserving of trust, of tenderness, of a love that honors you completely. And you are so much stronger than you even realize.